Well, welcome again to another podcast, Down to Earth but Heavenly Minded. And we are going to be continuing on in our study in Proverbs. And again, we are moving along, but we have a lot of territory to cover yet. So as we move into our next lesson, which is lesson number 19, we'll be looking at uh, how will wisdom affect my world? And let me just get to the right screen here. Now, how will wisdom affect my world? And there's a couple ways to look at it. And let's just start out. We're going to be covering a couple topics here, or at least one today, and that's disappointment. And we'll move on into other things. Before we dig into the text of Proverbs 3, verses 1 to 12, we must understand how disappointment works. You know, disappointment works in different ways on different people. So, we feel disappointed when our expectations are not met. Sometimes we lose what we expect to keep. Sometimes we miss what we expect to gain. At other times, we experience something we expect to avoid. Excuse me. Expectation infiltrates our motivations, and they come with a price tag, our happiness. It makes us very unhappy. They dash our hopes. They convert healthy relationships into needy ones, and they make people bitter and irritable. So that's kind of how disappointment really works. Maybe you expected to enjoy your job more than you do. Maybe you expected your parents to respect you as an adult. Maybe you thought church would be more exciting or that marriage would solve your lust problem. Maybe you expected to be financially stable by now. Maybe you just hope to get noticed. Uh, Everyone, once in a while anyway. In short, you wanted something but didn't get it, or you liked something and lost it, and you really feel disappointed. You know, my neighbor drives a real nice car, and I got this old jalopy, and I just, why can't I have a nice new shiny car? That's what disappointment is. Now, I'll illustrate two approaches on how we approach disappointment. And disappointment results when our expectations are not met. We talked about that. So most people deal with the disappointment by taking either one of two steps. One, in and down, or number two, out and around. Now those who take the disappointment in the down, in and down, tend to see themselves as the source of the problem. Well, perhaps they reason their expectations were too high. They're mentally relive the situation and assume it won't get any better. They might lower their expectations to avoid further disappointment, even to the point of losing hope. These people might believe God is disappointed with them and fail him. They feel that the downward and inward spiral until they bottom out in full-fledged depression. And I've seen this happen. I've seen people totally go into a state of depression. They read passages like Proverbs 3, verses 1 through 12, but refuse to get their hopes up. So they always go back to jobs and focus there. Because that's how life is. I mean, it really doesn't get any better than this. And that's their attitude. Okay, for example, if a friend forgets your birthday And if you take your disappointment inward, you might begin to assume that nobody will remember your birthday. You don't want to be a burden to people, so you say nothing about it. You lower your expectations to the point where you're surprised and uncomfortable if your birthday comes up in a conversation. You begin thinking of God as uh, a distant authority figure. He lets you into heaven because he has to, but he's pretty discouraged by what he ended up with when you became a Christian. As God and man continues to disagree or disregard you, you get even more discouraged, justifying your hopelessness. You're trapped in a heartbreaking cycle. Can you see where depression comes in? Well, now, if we look at the second thing, those who take disappointment out and around tend to blame others and that caused the problem. They pity themselves and expect others to join the party. They might attack those whom they perceive to be the offenders by complaining, uh, scolding, or sucking the life out of them until they change. They're difficult to work with because they always have critical remarks or a better idea. These people might believe God is against them and has failed them. They feel their disappointment until they gain a reputation for anger and aggression. Well, there's still two ways to handle it, and this is another. For example, in season one of the Downton Village prepared for their annual flower show. It was the Granham Cup, and it was supposed to go to the finest blossoms or blooms at the show. But the Dowager Countess of Granham played played expected by Dana Maggie Smith. I wasn't really into the show, but I did watch it. Uh, but she has won the cup for a long time, longer than she could remember. Then the Countess flowers are clearly inferior to those of the aging uh, commoner Mr. Mosley, but she has used her title and prestige to pressure the judges so long that she certainly will win again. She becomes so skilled at enforcing her expectations of victory that she doesn't even realize what she's doing. Only when she chooses to deny herself and award the trophy to Mr. Mosley does she handle her own expectations in a non abusive manner. Well, we get trapped in these two spirals, the in and down and the out and around all the time. And there's no end in sight, but God enters our disappointments to break the cycle. He helps us to look up and over our disappointments that we might see Him, our loving Father. Well, how do we expand on how exactly God enters our disappointments? Well, let me tell you, we feel disappointed when our expectations are not met. We mentioned this, and when we tend to blame either others or ourselves. But God came to earth to rescue us from the slavery of disappointment. He sent His Son, Jesus, to live among us and experience our disappointments. The night Jesus was betrayed, He expressed His great disappointment to His close companions. My soul is very sorrowful. even to death. My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. And he says to his friends, could not watch with me 1 hour? Matthew 26, verses 38 to 40. On the cross, his disappointment climaxed. My God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27:46. But Jesus' disappointments didn't turn him away from the Father. He didn't blame himself for experiencing too much from the dark, dark world. He didn't bend the situation to his own will. Coming down from the cross or calling leagues of angels to fight for him. No, rather than running away from God, Jesus let his disappointments bring him closer to God. His dying words were, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Luke 23:46. As Hebrew puts it, Jesus was the Son who learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Hebrews 5, verses 8 and 9. In other words, because Jesus drew close to God through his suffering and disappointment, he opened the way for you and me to do the same. He died to bring us salvation, and he lives to bring us closer to the Father, despite our disappointments. But how? We're going to answer all of that in our next podcast. So I'm going to leave it rest right here, and I'll see you on our next podcast, and we will answer that question. We'll see how he answers in our next podcast. So with that said, I'm going to end our podcast, and as usual, remember God is out here. You can find him in your Bible. All you have to do is look for him. So with that, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.